You do, but I'm just want to say to Stephen that if you continue to talk about trade deals like TPP in acronym soup and with sort of references to the elite, you're never going to win the social licence for trade deals. And I think there's a lot of benefit to trade deals, but you have to demonstrate the public good. Right, now you can move on, Jim.
Thank you. And I think we have shortchanged ourselves in terms of time about this topic again today, but I'll give it a go. It is Right to Die Day, and Parliament's inquiring into this issue. 21,000 submissions on it. More were heard today. Marion Street, president of the End of Life Choice Voluntary Euthanasia Society, is calling on the police to pause Operation Painter, stop harassing elderly people. Coincidentally, a petition from the Life Matters Suicide Prevention Trust was presented at Parliament today, and the Greens mentioning the 579 New Zealanders who took their own lives last year, a record high. Now, the other day, Research New Zealand reported to us that a strong majority of New Zealanders want a person to be able to choose to die with medical consultation for painful and curable illnesses. People aren't so keen on relatives and loved ones having a say on this. We got a lot of reaction, and the general flavour of it was, what is the reality of the overseas experience where euthanasia is being loosened up? One doctor, name withheld, says, I'm sorry to say the general public are not at all well informed about the reality of voluntary euthanasia and what actually happens in other countries where it's legal. What is your own positions, please, on euthanasia and what liberalisation of laws might lead to?
I supported a bill that was brought to Parliament by Mr Brown of New Zealand First, and I supported Marion Street's attempt, and I support what others are doing. I think it's unbelievably hypocritical for us to have made suicide lawful, but to criminalise euthanasia, where you have a procedure where the clear consent of the subject is involved.
The problem is, and I, like many people, I'm so conflicted on this, because the problem is when you get into situations where somebody doesn't have a terminal disease, where they might have lifelong depression, where they want to end their life, that seems to me an incredibly tragic situation to be in. Surely there's something else we can do in those situations. And the other risk that people have identified is when you have family members, and dysfunctional families don't suddenly become functional at somebody's bedside in a hospital. If you've got dysfunctional families and you've got pressure on somebody,
I don't think it should be up to the family. I'm say keep them out. It should be about the.
Okay, can I just ask you a quick question? Okay, keep the family out. You both agree. People in Belgium with schizophrenia, autism, bipolar disorder, dementia. Is this euthanasia, or could it become a kind of culling?
You see, this is when it starts to sound a little bit like eugenics, doesn't it? That if somebody is flawed, they're Down syndrome, they're bipolar, they've got mental health illnesses, it's really tricky. And I would love to have an easy view on this, but I don't.
If they go out and do it themselves, there's nothing the law can do. If they ask for help to do it, then we have this huge paraphernalia. And in my experience,
the hospital staff and doctors do actually practice.
And therein lie the different points of view. Thank you both so much today. Josie Pagani.
Thank you.
Stephen Franks on the panel. Thanks, everybody. Checkpoint following.
Kia ora everyone, tonight on Checkpoint, no corruption, but was the wool pulled over our eyes? Sorry, the Saudi sheep deal, significant shortcomings, what were they? Concerns about the arrangements, what arrangements and why? What the Auditor General said and reaction to it tonight. Lossi Filippo resentenced, we have that story. The Department of Corrections orders a review into the case of a terminally ill prisoner, Vicki Leti. Her uncle joins us with another new development. We have the latest on that. And unemployment down, but is the jobs market robust enough to be driving wages up? All of that and more over the next 90 minutes. Thank you for joining us on RNZ National. Checkpoint next, but coming up the 5 o'clock news with Katrina Batten.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten aho. The Foreign Minister accepts the Auditor-General's highly critical report on the government's Saudi sheep deal. More than $11 million of taxpayer money went in cash, livestock and agricultural equipment to a Saudi livestock importer the government was seeking to appease. In her report, Lynn Provost says there is no evidence of corruption, but there were significant shortcomings in a paper taken to the Cabinet supporting the deal and no detail about how the $11 million figure was arrived at. The Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, says he's confident the agreement removed a major obstacle holding back progress on a free trade deal with the Gulf.
She's made the comment that the use of a contract for services was a problematic way of approaching this, and I acknowledge that, but actually there weren't any non-problematic options available to us.
Murray McCully. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says he has full confidence in Mr McCully. A Wairarapa dairy farmer says today's lift in global dairy prices will relieve some of the pressure farmers are feeling from banks. The key whole milk powder price jumped nearly 20% overnight and is now above the average break-even point for the first time in 2 years. Mike Moran says after 2 years of losses, the price increases give hope Fonterra will lift its forecast payout. An aviation industry group is criticising the Conservation Department's decision to stop using Robinson helicopters, saying it appears to be a knee-jerk reaction. DOC has suspended the use of all Robinson helicopters for transporting its staff after a fatal crash on Monday, and the aircraft's placement on the Transport Accident Investigation Commission's watch list of serious concerns. But Aviation New Zealand says it's too soon to draw any links between Monday's crash and the safety of the Robinson helicopters. The police say 3 children hid in a bush, terrified after a man tried to kidnap one of them on their walk home from school in Whangarei. They say 2 brothers, one aged 10 and a friend, were walking along McClintock Street in Faux Valley about 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Detective Senior Sergeant Dave Hamilton says a late model silver 4-door sedan stopped by them in the middle of the road.
A male got out, approached one of the boys, grabbing hold of him by his backpack that he was wearing and dragged him towards the rear of the car and the boot of the car, which was open. The child was able to escape and the 3 kids ran away. They hid in some nearby bushes for some time before returning home at about 4 o'clock, where they spoke with their mother, who rang the police.
Dave Hamilton says they've yet to speak to the children. The High Court was told a rugby player who stomped on a man's head after knocking him unconscious is likely to suffer the consequences of his offending for years to come. Losi Filippo was today sentenced to 9 months supervision and ordered to attend alcohol and drug counselling and a living without violence course. He was resentenced after the High Court in Wellington last week overturned a discharge without conviction granted in the District Court on 4 assault charges. Filippo's lawyer, Noel Sainsbury, said as well as losing his contract with Wellington Rugby, his client has also suffered public humiliation.
The media hysteria that has followed this case is likely to mark him out for years to come. Now, it's possible he will overcome that hurdle, but that would test the resolve and the character and the will of an individual with all the advantages life can give them. It certainly is going to test Mr. Filippo.
Noel Sainsbury urged Justice Collins to impose a sentence that allowed Losi Filippo the chance of rehabilitation. 4 inmates at Auckland Prison have been charged after an attack on 6 guards. The Corrections Department said when the incident happened last month, all guards had stab-proof vests but would not confirm the assault was a stabbing. None received life-threatening injuries. The police say the 4 men, aged from 22 to 32, are facing 14 charges in total. The 4 will appear most likely via video link from prison in the North Shore District Court on Monday. A large pig running amok on an Auckland motorway has been captured by the police. Officers were called just before 4 o'clock after drivers reported seeing the large brown pig jump off a vehicle on the northwestern motorway near Great North Road. The police say the pig is injured and will be handed over to Animal Management Services. It's 5:04. To sport, Basketball New Zealand accepts the country's highest paid athlete may never take the court for the Tall Blacks. 23-year-old Stephen Adams has re-signed with the Oklahoma City Thunder Basketball on a 4-year, $140 million deal. Adams has never played for the Tall Blacks, and Potter says it's set to stay that way.
The very best of our players are going to play offshore, and we just have to live with that. It is frustrating as an administrator who'd just like to be able to say, right, 12 best players. These are their names, and they're all available because we chose them. That's not the way it works in basketball.
Ian Potter. The Olympic rowing champion Hamish Bond has shown he's not only a force to be reckoned with on the water, but also on a bike. Bond has moved into second place overall after finishing third on stage 3 of the Cycle Tour of Southland. The stage was won by Bond's teammate, Australian Michael Torkler. Torkler also holds the tour leader's yellow jersey. The Kiwis Rugby League side is dismissing suggestion Sean Johnson's match-winning field goal against England sailed wide of the uprights. Johnson kicked the winner in the Kiwis Four Nations 17-16 win against England last weekend. However, replays have brought into question the legitimacy of the one-pointer. The Warriors halfback says he had the best view out of everyone, and he's positive the kick scraped inside the upright. The Kiwis play Australia on Sunday morning. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Martha Jeffries, the Kiwi connection to a global documentary series on climate change produced by James Cameron and Arnold Schwarzenegger. RNZ fashionista Sonia Sly meets the Asian designer Pearlie Wong, and Liak Collins is on the line from Israel, lamenting the death of former Prime Minister Shimon Peres and celebrating the high-tech sector he helped to create. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula, a few showers clearing later, fine tomorrow apart from a few evening showers. Bay of Plenty, showers, some heavy with thunderstorms in the east, clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. Waitomo to Kapiti Coast, including Taupo, Taumarunui and Taihape, cloudy periods and a few showers. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly fine, a few afternoon showers, possibly heavy tomorrow. Wellington and Wairarapa, fine spells today and a few showers, possibly heavy about Wairarapa, fine tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, fine spells today and a few showers inland, some heavy. Fine tomorrow apart from showers in the west of Nelson. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine spells, a few showers developing this afternoon. Possible thunderstorms and hail in Southland and Clutha tomorrow. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, a period of rain with possible thunderstorms spreading north later today and overnight, followed by a few showers. And the Chatham Islands, fine today, rain tomorrow. It's 5:05 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks so much, Katrina. In a moment, the Saudi sheep deal and the Auditor General's report. No corruption is the headline, of course, but in the body of the report, phrases such as lack of clarity, significant shortcomings, lack of transparency, and so on abound. Coming up on Checkpoint tonight, Benedict Collins on what the Auditor General has said and why. What does this all mean? Plus, Murray McCulley's response, and David Parker on what he makes of all of this. All of that ahead of us. But before that, a development in a story we first brought to you last Friday. This is Vicki Leti, the terminally ill woman with a life expectancy now of less than 6 months who has failed to gain an early release from prison. Sentenced to 3 years imprisonment back in March and September, having been seriously ill for some weeks but not diagnosed, she was finally taken to hospital where she was diagnosed with stomach cancer that has spread throughout her body. A first appeal to the parole board for early release was unsuccessful despite her entire medical team insisting she's too sick to be adequately cared for in prison. On Thursday, she was rushed to hospital for the treatment of complications arising from her illness. Tonight, we can reveal 2 new developments. One, that the Chief Executive of Corrections has requested a review of the case and its health management. A review has been requested. And a second development detailed by Vicki Leteli's uncle, Ula Leteli.
She's been returned back to the Wiri facility for women from the hospital.
So she has left Middlemore?
She's probably on the way back at this very moment.
As we speak?
As we speak.
And you have tried so hard. The family has tried so hard.
Very hard, very hard.
In fact, her doctors have made a compelling and singular case for her to not return to Wiri.
Correct. And we're still trying, we haven't given up. When you consider that all of the doctors' advice have been to return her to her home because she's best cared there, it's being ignored. And when you consider that that meets the criteria of one of the 2 points that enable the success of a application for early release, and that is the facility is unable to take care of her, and the medical fraternity are saying they cannot, and yet they still go against the medical profession advice. It just, I don't understand it.
Forgive me, because these are tough questions, but Vicki's guilt is not in dispute, and the appropriateness of her serving jail time is not in dispute.
Absolutely, no, not at all. She's made a mistake. It's an honest mistake, and she's paying her debt to society. Except the difference being is that prior to becoming aware of her illness, it's now a death sentence. She has, from the time that she was told that she had terminal cancer, she was told that it was less than 6 months. Well, that was in September. We're talking November now. So the clock's ticking. There's 2 or 3 months left, understanding the context of what the medical profession have told us. It's a terminal prognosis.
Ula, forgive us for doing this, but lots of people want to be certain of that fact when they discuss this case. Yes. And so today we called Vicki's consultant surgeon, and she's had a lot of people looking after her, but this is the man who did the operation to remove the tumour. So he's Mr. David Moss. He's a consultant general surgeon at Middlemore, and this is what he said about Vicki's condition.
Really, Vicki has incurable disease. We did surgery. We were able to remove most of her stomach cancer, but it had spread already, and we were not able to remove all of it. And unfortunately, stomach cancer is notoriously poorly responsive to chemotherapy. So while Vicki is having chemotherapy with the idea of prolonging things, really I don't think anyone would believe that there is other than a very small chance that this will cure her. Really, it's minuscule chance that she'll be cured with chemotherapy. The idea of this chemotherapy is to prolong things for her and give her, hopefully, some improved quality of life for what I think is probably a matter of months she's got to live.
So that's David Moss repeating exactly what you were just saying and what you went to the parole board with. Now, all of this has happened very fast. Vicki wasn't even diagnosed till September, right?
Correct.
You've gone to the parole board with one application. They have said no to this point, but there are grounds explicitly for you to go back to the parole board, aren't there?
And they're really based on her condition and the deterioration of her condition. So really what we're saying, if you think of it in layman's terms, it's until she gets sick to the point of death, then they will not release her. Because as part of the second criteria to the opportunity to apply for early release is her demise being called imminent. Now, imminent is 3 to 5 days. Now, if you listen to what Dr. Moss was just saying in terms of chemotherapy providing a delay, or rather trying to improve her quality of life, well, it's to improve her quality of life so she can live it to say goodbye to her family. That's what you would incorporate as being a quality of life, not waiting until she's on her deathbed to be then transferred to a hospice and to die. There's spiritually, culturally, morally, you wouldn't treat a dog in the same way. And that's what the family is. We don't deny and she's owned up to the mistake that she made, and we all make mistakes. But we just want to take her home. We just want to love on her. We want her also to be able to love and to say goodbye to her partner and to her children, and do it in a way that any human being ought to be allowed that dignity to be able to say goodbye.
When did you find out that she was going back from Middlemore to Wiri today?
Just this morning. I visited her early hours of this morning and was told that she was being returned.
And how is she?
She's in good spirits, but she's a strong girl, so she doesn't show you the full extent of her pain. She's going back with the knowledge that while she continues to undergo, and as it gets further into the treatment, that the same thing that's happened to her now, you heard what Dr. Moss said, it won't get any better as she's going through it. Or in fact, halfway through this first 6-week program, we're into the second week.
This is of chemo, right?
Of the chemotherapy. She then now undergoes an infusion, which she has to be hospitalised for. Now, currently...
So she's going to leave Wiri and go back to hospital?
She will go back to the hospital.
Have the chemotherapy infusion?
Correct.
And then go back to Wiri?
Well, we're assuming that might be the case, but we're, God willing, that the second application that we put in that's demonstrated that if the facility were able to take care of her, she would not have had to go from the facility when she was ill last Wednesday, admitted into Middlemore Hospital on a Thursday and only released again today. So that in itself beggars belief that if the facility is saying that they can take care of her, but yet she's had to be hospitalised to enable her to get... you see, that the facility is unable to administer opiates. It's just not allowed to do that, morphine and things like this. So it's a little bit trying to second guess her next reaction or her next need.
Can you describe the circumstances in which she's living? Because the thing about chemotherapy is that it knocks you about.
Correct.
So not only does she have terminal cancer,
Correct.
but there are a whole lot of things associated with that,
Correct.
particularly the kind of large doses that she's about to have.
Yes.
So that her immunity is somewhat
There is no
compromised.
immunity.
Right. So where is she living?
She's living in a communal home that accommodates 4 people.
So she's in there with 3 other women?
There's 3 other people that live with her. She's in a room that is several metres away from a call button if it's required. Now, I know that there are times there that she's been in excruciating pain and not been able to leave her bed, to be able to walk those metres, to be able to press the button, to get relief. And normally it takes 20 to 30 minute sort of time delay for someone to then respond from the medical centre. And because some of the drugs that she's on have to be kept away from her for obvious reasons. There's all this time delay in terms of being able to respond to that particular need, which if she's in either a home environment where we would be able to provide her with the palliative care that we've been told is available, and also within a hospital, it's instantaneous.
So if the facility was designed for this type of illness, in other words, if there was good care there, if there was instant pain relief
Correct.
readily available,
Correct.
if people were able to get to her, if there were nurses on standby the
Correct.
whole time, if the call button was beside her
Correct.
bed, if the family had access to her, you would not be opposed per se
No.
to her being in
No.
that situation.
No.
So it's about the ability of this corrections facility to care for her
Correct.
as you believe she deserves to be cared
Correct.
for.
It's not designed for this type of patient. And I believe that it's the only one Vicki's the only person that is there. It's a medical facility that takes care of, I can't describe it, but anything less than the seriousness of dealing with someone that's A, got terminal cancer, and B, that's on a 18-week chemotherapy program.
So you're going back to the parole board?
We're going back to the parole board on Friday.
And the family is taking this appeal itself, paying for this appeal itself?
It's been, yes, we are. Yes, we are.
And your message to the parole board will be what?
Is to show a heart, is to show some humanity. She's
Ula Leteli, who was Vicki Leteli's uncle, speaking to us earlier. So we just want to reiterate on a couple of developments this afternoon. Firstly, Vicki Leteli has been taken back to the corrections facility at Wiri from Middlemore Hospital, where she was receiving treatment for complications arising from her illness. Secondly, the Department of Corrections has ordered a review into the case of her care and treatment. And the Corrections Minister, Judith Collins, was asked about Vicki Leteli's case on the bridge earlier this afternoon. This is what she had to say.
Corrections Chief Executive Ray Smith has spoken to me today on this matter and advised me that he's asked the Chief Health person or doctor at Corrections to review the decision. So it's ultimately a decision for the parole board, but obviously Corrections makes recommendations. So they're reviewing what that Corrections can properly look after the prisoner, and so I think that's where it is at the moment.
So this is very much a work in progress, and we will update you if we hear anything more on this case. Let's turn now to the Saudi sheep deal and the 15-month investigation into it. It's raised major concerns about a lack of transparency from the government. Says it concealed the true nature of the deal from the public. Some pretty fascinating language in this report. Yet the long-awaited Auditor General's report has found no evidence that the Saudi sheep deal amounted to corruption or bribery, as ministers didn't personally benefit from the deal or act against the law. Now, shortly we'll talk to our political reporter, Benedict Collins, who has been following this. He was at the media conference this afternoon when the Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, who led the deal, reacted to the report. But first, this report from Benedict.
The government is giving $11.5 million worth of cash, livestock and agricultural equipment to a billionaire Saudi livestock importer to appease him and help secure a free trade deal with the Gulf states. For a year and a half, Murray McCully has been under fire for the Saudi sheep deal. Today he seized upon the finding that he didn't act corruptly.
You may recall that in relation to this matter, some very strong, colourful and defamatory statements were made suggesting that there had been corruption, bribery, facilitation payments, dodgy deals, that sort of thing. And the Auditor General has found quite clearly that there was no bribery, no corruption, no facilitation payments, and that all of the payments were made lawfully and within the scope of the appropriation for which they were provided.
But that was the only silver lining for Mr McCully in what was a very critical report about his deal. The Auditor General, Lynn Provo, says she shares the concerns of many New Zealanders about the lack of transparency around the deal. She also said that the establishment of an agri-hub in the Saudi desert, that the public was told would showcase the very best of New Zealand agriculture, was nothing more than a guise for the settlement of Hamoud Al-Khalaf's grievance. Mr McCully says he accepts the findings.
The Auditor General does say that there was room for improvement in relation to two matters. Firstly, that the use of a contract for services in this case was, I think, her word is problematic. And secondly, that the Cabinet paper should have given more analysis than it did on some matters. In relation to any criticism of the process, I would simply say that we'll take that on the chin.
The Auditor General also says that she shares the concerns of many New Zealanders about the lack of transparency regarding this deal from start to finish, pretty much to now. She says even government ministers have still failed to properly explain many aspects of this deal. I mean, is that acceptable?
I'd put that down to being a joint failing of government ministers and the New Zealand media.
Labour's Shadow Attorney General David Parker won the right to hold a snap debate on the report in Parliament this afternoon. He says the report did not exonerate the government.
It lays bare an absolutely disgraceful stain upon the record of New Zealand, which has acted immorally, improperly, wasted millions of dollars, covered it up, lied to the Parliament, lied to the public, and it is only because of the very good services of a couple of journalists in particular that this even came to light.
That's David Parker, who'll be joining us live on Checkpoint later. Joining us live on Checkpoint right now is Benedict Collins. Good to have you with us, Benedict. I'm looking at the report. 3.31, Ministry's legal advisers were not asked for input. 3.38, the Treasury's pre-cabinet briefings to the Minister of Finance in February expressed concern about a lack of clarity. The Minister of Finance was recommended not to support the proposal. 3.34, significant shortcomings. 3.36, shortcomings, lack of transparency, and on and on and on. I mean, we've only got 90 minutes on this program. Murray McCully is saying exoneration with some small qualification. Is it?
Well, I mean, from his point of view, yes, it is. I mean, he's not going to get sacked immediately. It found this wasn't a corrupt deal. It found that this wasn't bribery. You know, government ministers, officials, they didn't stand to gain personally. They didn't act, with bad intentions here. But I mean, this report really, as you've just explained there, John, really does explain just what a shoddy process this was. I mean, it talks about the agri-hub in Saudi Arabia that we were all told would showcase the best of New Zealand agriculture, just been a guise to, placate Hamoud Ali Al-Khalaf, who of course was angry with the New Zealand government because back in the early 2000s we stopped exporting live sheep there because of animal welfare concerns. And of course, as people who've been following this story, like I have for 18 months, will know, the government, even as part of this deal, flew 900 sheep on a Singapore Airlines flight up to the Saudi desert. All their lambs died as soon as they got up there. And I mean, this report just, really does sort of indicate how shoddy things were.
Yeah, and a sense of a somewhat craven desire to keep this character happy, disguised as something else, even in cabinet papers. Now, the Auditor General is very clear there is no corruption here because no one was personally benefiting from it. But, boy, this absence of transparency, which is referred to over and over, and 5.14, Cabinet was asked to note the expenditure rather than agree to it. Now, that stuff smells, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's fascinating looking at this. You know, the Auditor General says Cabinet didn't even know that Al Khalaf was going to end up owning all this equipment and all the livestock that we were sending him. You know, it seems remarkable that you'd take a paper to Cabinet that was so flawed.
Why would you do that, Benedict? Cognizant of the rules of defamation.
Yes. I mean, so it's going to be really interesting to see how things play out here. The government saying, hey, you know, we're in the clear. But you've got the Green Party today. They said, hey, look, you know, they still think, hey, it might not be illegal, but they still think, you know, McCulley should be held to account here for this really, really shoddy deal.
Yes, is McCulley going to be held to account? The Prime Minister seems to be standing by him this afternoon. What next?
Yeah, well, the Prime Minister, he made some comments on the way into Parliament that I was present for. He was saying, you know, this was a difficult situation and that he thought McCulley had done his best in this situation. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, you know, further comments that the Prime Minister makes about this.
So, are we being told that the end justified the means?
Well, certainly the government's, that's what the government's telling us, yeah.
Yeah, and what is the Auditor General saying? She's not that clear on that, is she?
Well, no. So she I think she toes quite a careful line here between, you know, saying, well, there isn't corruption or bribery. She says, and it was interesting, you know, listening to Mr. McCulley talk earlier today, saying, you know, he'd been the victim of, you know, accusations of being corrupt or
yes,
bribery.
He said defamatory accusations.
Yeah, that's right. And yet the Auditor General says, hey, well, when there's such a lack of transparency from start to finish, that creates the conditions for these sort of accusations to thrive. So he's very much the author of the situation he finds himself in, I think.
Benedict Collins, our political reporter who's been covering this story for RNZ. Thanks, Benedict. We do have a bid in for the Minister to join us. The bid remains open, of course, and David Parker, who was fairly vehement about this in the House for Labour this afternoon, will join us after 6. It's 5:27. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up, rugby player Lossie Filippo sentenced to 9 months supervision. This is the resentencing. Of course, the aviation industry criticises the Department of Conservation decision to stop using Robinson helicopters and much more. The sprint, is it to the finish line in the US election, also coming up. We'd love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101. Feedback welcome on all the stories we are covering, no matter what your point of view is on them. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we are, of course, on Facebook. Thank you for the feedback that is already coming in. We'll bring you a sample of it later. A rugby player who stomped on a man's head after knocking him unconscious has been sentenced to 9 months supervision. Lossie Filippo will also attend alcohol and drug counselling and a living without violence course. He was re-sentenced today after the High Court in Wellington last week overturned an earlier discharge without conviction granted in the District Court. Our court reporter Anne-Marie May filed this report.
Lossie Filippo was just 17 when he and his brother provoked a fight in a Wellington street in October last year. As well as stomping on Gregory Morgan's head while he was unconscious, Filippo also assaulted another man and 2 women. Justice Collins said the offending was disturbing.
Even when weapons are not used, attacks on the head of a victim can have particularly serious consequences. Thus, where a victim is subjected to a severe beating or kicking causing head injuries, the offender's conduct will be treated similarly to offending involving the use of a weapon. Second, the vulnerability of Mr. Morgan when you stomped on his head. At that stage, he was unconscious and particularly vulnerable.
Sally Carter, the Crown lawyer acting for the police, accepted there were several mitigating factors in Filippo's favour.
Youth, obviously, the guilty plea, the reparation that was paid, and the Crown have always advocated that this would reach an end sentence below 2 years, and therefore a sentence of imprisonment would not be what the court would be looking at imposing.
Filippo's lawyer Noel Sainsbury said the conviction would affect his client's ability to play professional rugby overseas, and he stood by his comments in the district court that a discharge without conviction would be appropriate. He said as well as losing his contract with Wellington Rugby, his client had also suffered public humiliation as a result of the case.
The media hysteria that has followed this case is likely to mark him out for years to come. Now, it's possible he will overcome that hurdle, but that would test the resolve and the character and the will of an individual with all the advantages life can give them. It certainly is going to test Mr. Filippo.
Noel Sainsbury said while Gregory Morgan had suffered serious consequences, it was concerning that media stories had referred to the assault ending his rugby career. He read from a post on Mr. Morgan's Facebook page, which suggested that may not have been the case, as he had had 15 rugby-related concussions since 2011.
4 of those have been in the last 12 months, which have put me out of work and training for 6 months. Should have stopped 10 concussions ago, but choosing to toughen up and carry on with the game I love has now taken effect on me. I'm only 20 years old. If I was to receive another concussion, the consequences are unthinkable.
Justice Collins set a sentence starting point of 2 years jail, but gave Filippo several discounts, including for the fact he was a first offender, the rehabilitation steps he had already taken, the $1,000 reparation he had paid, and his age. He said if Filippo continued to receive help and guidance, there was every prospect of him being a productive member of the community.
You have experienced a significant setback in your goal to become a professional rugby player. That dream, however, is not at an end. You have the opportunity to demonstrate that you are worthy of being a professional rugby player.
After the hearing, Mr. Sainsbury said Filippo was very sorry for what had happened and now wants to get on with his life. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Let's go to the US now, where Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are crisscrossing the United States, and the swing states they're visiting tell us a lot about how worried they are. For Hillary Clinton, it's the 14th time she's been to Pennsylvania in just over a week. The BBC's John Sopel reports.
All our presidents. Wow. Whoa.
Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton both launched their campaigns in June 2015, that is, and they've been going at it non-stop ever since. Now there's just 1 week to go. This is where the marathon turns into a sprint as the candidates hurtle around campaigning in the handful of states that will determine this election. They're the key swing states of Florida and North Carolina in the south, and Ohio and Pennsylvania in the industrial north. For Donald Trump to have a path to victory, he needs to win all 4. But successive polls suggest Hillary Clinton has comfortable leads in both North Carolina and Pennsylvania.
Thank you, everybody.
And that is why in the race for the keys to the White House, Donald Trump may have momentum, but Hillary Clinton is still ahead where she needs to be. The key battleground of Florida played host to Hillary Clinton again today. No mention of emails. She wanted to turn the attention back to Donald Trump and his suitability for high office.
If you've got a daughter, a granddaughter, a sister, a mother, a wife, a good friend, someone like this becoming president who insults more than half the population of the United States of America. And what about our boys? This is not someone we want them looking up to.
But will the latest email scandal hurt her in those key swing states?
All politicians have mix-ups and foul-ups. I think she's doing her best, to be honest. I still trust her.
I really think this is hurting her, especially so close to the election. I think there's already been a lot of doubt, really, this whole season, this whole campaign season, and this isn't helping anything.
And that's what Donald Trump is hoping for. He was in Pennsylvania today talking policy, in particular his plan to repeal and replace the health reforms introduced by Barack Obama.
It will be such an honor for me, for you, and for everybody in this country, because Obamacare has to be replaced. And we will do it, and we will do it very, very quickly. It is a catastrophe.
But for some of the electorate, these pledges may not make a difference. In many states, early voting has already started. It's estimated that around 24 million Americans have already voted. That's about 20% of the likely turnout. And the figures of registered Republicans and Democrats going to vote shows a slight edge for Hillary Clinton.
In trying to explain this race, American political pundits have started using the phrase of a British Prime Minister from the 1960s, Harold Wilson's comment that a week is a long time in politics. In this helter-skelter, white-knuckle ride, indeed it is. And who knows what's going to happen next.
It's the mind boggles, really. That's the BBC's John Sopel. Coming up on Checkpoint, unemployment falls below 5% for the first time in nearly 8 years. Dairy farmers react to a big jump in milk prices. A Christchurch woman says she's considering bankruptcy as she tires of battling with her insurer. Nona has business news, but first, the 5:35 and a bit headlines with Katrina Batten.
The Auditor General says the government's Saudi sheep deal had significant shortcomings, but there's no evidence of corruption or bribery. More than $11 million of taxpayer money went in cash, livestock and agricultural equipment to a Saudi livestock importer the government was seeking to appease. The Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, says he's confident the sheep deal removed a major obstacle holding back progress on a free trade agreement with Gulf countries. Westpac has today closed 19 branches across the country. The closures were met with protests in rural communities when they were proposed in August. In the central Otago town of Ranfurly today, locals filed into the bank to pay their respects to its 2 long-serving staff members and conduct last-minute banking. An aviation industry group is criticising the Conservation Department's decision to stop using Robinson helicopters, saying it appears to be a knee-jerk reaction. DOC has suspended the use of all Robinson helicopters for transporting its staff after a fatal crash on Monday, and the aircraft's placement on the Transport Accident Investigation Commission's watch list of serious concern. But Aviation New Zealand says it's too soon to draw any links between Monday's crash and the safety of the helicopters. The High Court was told a rugby player who stomped on a man's head after knocking him unconscious is likely to suffer the consequences of his offending for years to come. Losi Filippo was today sentenced to 9 months supervision and ordered to attend alcohol and drug counselling. He was resentenced on 4 assault charges after an earlier discharge without conviction was overturned. The Christchurch City Council has voted to completely ban freedom camping. It has amended a bylaw to stop visitors from camping without toilets on their vehicles. The change takes effect next month. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Nona with business news next, but a couple of stories before that impact on what Nona's going to talk about. Firstly, unemployment. It's fallen below 5% for the first time in nearly 8 years. New figures show 128,000 people were out of work. In the 3 months to September, that's 4.9% of the workforce, the lowest level since December 2008. But pay rises remain muted for all but a few industries. Our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports.
The co-owner of property services company Quinovic Parnell, David Vinson, says business is booming, but it's hard to find the right staff.
There is increasing demand for professional property management with skilled and experienced teams, and therefore there's a demand for good quality, experienced staff.
The economy added 35,000 jobs in the September quarter, with the bulk of that coming from people entering the workforce. Unemployment fell by only 3,000 people. Economists are still unsure about the actual strength of the labour market, given Statistics New Zealand has revamped the way it analyses the data. But a senior economist at Westpac, Anne Boniface, says there's no doubt firms are in hiring mode.
Usually where we see stronger activity in the economy, so certainly in some of the service sectors, which have benefited from the boom in tourism in particular, so retail and food service industries have seen solid job growth.
The Finance Minister Bill English says there's employment growth in most parts of the country, reflecting the resilience of the rural sector.
One aspect of the statistics that is particularly pleasing is the falling unemployment in many regions, particularly the West Coast, Manawatu, Wanganui, Northland and the Waikato, with a number of regions having unemployment under 5% and some even under 4%.
Fewer women are out of work, and while Māori and Pacifica unemployment remains high, it has declined. In some sectors, like construction, workers are experiencing fatter pay packets. The industry coordinator for infrastructure at the Etu Union, Ron Angel, says Auckland is the place to be for the likes of carpenters, labourers, painters, plumbers and electricians.
we're hearing stories of 5, 10, 15% wage growth between when people are putting in the prices for contracts and when they actually get onto the job. The pressure on the employers to keep workers. So in that interim, the employees are starting to say, well, I can get another couple of dollars an hour down the road. So they're having to pay $3 an hour more just to keep them to be able to do the jobs they've already won.
But overall wage growth remains subdued. Annual wage inflation edged up to 1.6%. The Council of Trade Unions, Bill Rosenberg, says it partly reflects a shift toward low-wage jobs.
Shifting towards industries like accommodation, food services, retail trade, where pay is very low, often close to the minimum wage. This is really the opposite direction that we really want to see.
Dr. Rosenberg says the focus should be on high-value, decent jobs, which is better for the economy and future growth. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
Let's go to dairy farmers, which is the other big business economic story of the day. A big jump in milk prices is a huge release for them, but will it last? The key whole milk powder price is now above the average break-even point for the first time in nearly 2.5 years, after jumping nearly 20% at Fonterra's overnight global dairy auction. Anusha Bradley reports on this.
Farmers generally need whole milk powder to sell for $3,000 a tonne to break even, and overnight the price rose to $3,317. Lloyd Downing, who's been farming near Morrinsville for 52 years, says the lift is definitely a morale booster.
It's great for the country, it's great for farmers. Long may it stay there.
Are you feeling quite confident that the prices will remain around this level?
Yes, definitely. I would like to think that it would stay at between 3.3 or say 3.6, not go anything stupid like it did there a few years ago, because it just gives the signal for the rest of the world and New Zealand to start producing a lot more.
He says the drop in Fonterra's payout from $8.40 per kilogram of milk solids to just over $3.90 over the last 2 years has been a huge culture shock for farmers.
We've got quite a bit of debt, but I mean, we've been farming for a long time, and so we can handle that sort of thing a lot better. People who have had high input costs are really, really struggling.
Ashburton dairy farmer Willie Lefrink knows what that is like. As dairy prices tanked, he was forced to sell land to make ends meet. But with today's good news, he says the future looks much brighter.
Oh, jubilant. It's fantastic, it's probably a little bit like Christmas come early. One farm we're certainly under pressure, but in general we can cope. We've never been, really at the bad end of the banks, but it's certainly helpful to have a little bit more leeway.
It's been so volatile though, and so many farmers I've spoken to today just say, we just don't know which direction it's going next. How are you feeling about the future?
No, I'm a bit more confident. Europe is having a lot of regulations imposed on them around nutrient management, and when we can't make ends meet, they definitely can't make ends meet because they're roughly living under the same world prices as we now.
A North Canterbury share milker, Melissa Slattery, also sold off parts of her business to reduce debt. While she welcomes the latest increase, she's cautious about what lies ahead.
Volatility has been posted in our brains pretty heavily. I suppose you just got to take the good with the bad and carry on and just hope for the best, really.
As of June, total dairy debt stood at more than $40 billion. That's 2/3 of all agricultural debt and more than 6 times the amount people owe on their credit cards. In September, Fonterra raised its forecast payout to $5.25 per kilo of milk solids, and ASB is picking it could increase to $6. A Wairarapa dairy farmer, Mike Moran, says that will relieve some of the pressure farmers are feeling from banks.
Well, it gives us some confidence that obviously the payout's going to be backed up this year and possibly a bit more. It probably comes at the expense of Waikato and Taranaki farmers that are struggling with production, and the overseas people probably seeing there's not the product going to be around.
The downturn in prices over the last couple of years, how's that affected you?
Well, it's been pretty tough. It's 2 years of losses, and even if you come good this year, you've got a fair way to go to pay back the overdraft. From that before you get back to like 3 or 4 years ago.
Like most dairy farmers, Mike Moran says he'll be watching the next few global dairy trade auctions closely for signs that higher prices are really here to stay, because farmers won't get one extra cent until Fonterra raises its payout. For Checkpoint, ko Anusha Bradley, aho.
Thanks, Anusha. So, Nona Peltier, unemployment down, dairy prices up, as we just heard from Anusha. Anything else we need to know today?
Yeah, it's a trifecta. We've also had some news out of the Reserve Bank's inflationary expectation survey that they do, and it's a touch higher. So this is a positive news for the economy generally, and that means that the interest rate cut that we're expecting this month from the Reserve Bank may well indeed be the last one. So we may see a cut there to 1.75%. Certainly the market has priced that in. But the ones that people were talking about in the future, say 1.5%, that seems more unlikely than ever now.
Because they were required to stimulate the economy and get inflation back into that range. It looks potentially like inflation is heading north anyway.
It looks like it's getting up there. And of course, wage inflation, we've heard a little bit about
from
that.
Patrick,
So the economic signals are very strong. Of course.
Wait, although Patrick was saying wage inflation isn't great, right? But...
Well, we heard, though, that the construction sector...
Exactly.
And so expectations is what the Reserve Bank looks to. So what's happening today isn't what happened yesterday is not as important as what happens tomorrow. And it's the expectations that will trigger the Reserve Bank's attitude towards monetary policy. Now, all of this could be thrown in the wind, as you know, because of the U.S. federal election going on right now. Lots of uncertainty in the markets there, upset in Asia. People are flying from riskier assets into safer ones. There's a lot of turmoil, and we've seen that in our market here today. Our top 50 index ended down 1.1%, which is, quite a big drop down. That's 77 points to 6,854, and we haven't seen that since the end of June.
No. And in the context of those indicators, that's unusual, but that speaks of external uncertainty, does it?
That's right. And meanwhile, of course, the US dollar has tanked a little bit because that's, the uncertainty is hitting the dollar. And we've seen the New Zealand dollar rise somewhat to 72.2 US cents, and also against the Australian dollar at 94.6 and 59 pence.
Nona Peltier, our business reporter who joins us in the studio most nights. Thank you, Nona, for that. We're going to go to a story about the aviation industry now, criticising the Conservation Department's decision to stop using Robinson helicopters, saying it appears to be a knee-jerk reaction. Today, the Department of Conservation announced it suspended the use of all Robinson helicopters for the transporting of staff, volunteers and contractors. But Aviation New Zealand says the helicopters are safe if they're flown properly. Here's Michael Kropp.
Last week, the Transport Accident Investigation Commission put Robinson helicopters on its watch list of serious concerns, the highest level of scrutiny possible. Then, on Monday, a Robinson R44 crashed in Northland, killing 2 forestry workers. Today, the Department of Conservation announced its staff would no longer fly in the aircraft, but Aviation New Zealand's Chief Executive John Nicholson says it's too soon to draw any links between Monday's crash, for which an investigation has barely started, and the reason the aircraft have been watch-listed.
It's difficult, isn't it? The take report came out last week, and then we've had the accident this week. There's a danger that companies will make knee-jerk reactions and associate one with the other, and it's far too early to be doing that.
Mr Nicholson says the aircraft have been widely used throughout the country since the 1990s and is urging pilots to fly the helicopters within their operating limits. The Department of Conservation's Health and Safety Director Harry Mayer declined to talk directly to RNZ today, but in a press release said the decision was taken to ensure the safety of DOC staff. On his way into Parliament today, the Transport Minister Simon Bridges told reporters the helicopters are safe when operated within the manufacturer's guidelines.
Providing that the Robinsons are flown within the manufacturer's guidelines and the training rules, and there's been quite a lot of this followed, that they are safe. So I think in terms of anything beyond that, the banning or anything of these aircraft, that would be unwarranted at this time on the state of the evidence that we've got.
While training is a factor, the Transport Accident Investigation Commission also said the helicopter flight manuals did not draw enough attention to safety-critical instructions. Mr Bridges' colleague, Conservation Minister Maggie Barry, backed her ministry, saying it's too soon to pin it all on the pilots.
I'm not sure that that's proven at this time. I think it's very difficult to put, and the Erebus disaster would prove that you don't blame pilots straight away when it may be a mechanical error or other problems. So from my perspective, Minister Bridges may know more than I, but from my perspective I would wait till further information is through from Civil Aviation. These are very complicated issues.
The Transport Accident Investigation Commission says it spent today interviewing people involved with the latest crash and will conduct its main examination of the accident site tomorrow, where a Robinson safety investigator will also be present. For Checkpoint, Michael Kropdane.
10 minutes to 6. A Christchurch swim school owner says she's so fed up with dealing with her insurance company, she's considering abandoning her home and her business and declaring herself bankrupt. Chrissy Tukaki runs a swim school from her home, specialising in swim lessons for children who are intellectually and physically disadvantaged. Her home and pool were repaired after the quakes, but Chrissy says the work was substandard, and she was told in December 2014 it would need to be demolished and rebuilt. 2 years on, she's no further along, and she told our reporter Rachel Graham she's run out of money to keep fighting Tower Insurance.
The pool was replaced and the building was repaired, and the repair is now a demolition and rebuild. The pool is wrong, the measurements are wrong, and I've been fighting with the builders, the insurance company, Stream Group for coming up 5 years. There's been 3 new sets of concept plans for the new design, and they have now told me that I have to go back to my neighbours and get the resource consents all over again because they've made a mistake in the footprint. So where we're at right now is I have told them I will not go and get them. You made the mistake, and I've been told you will do as you're told. You are the customer. You need to do it.
So you had, so they initially agreed to repair your pool. That work was done, yes. And yet after that happened, you were always unhappy with it, were you?
They said they would repair it. I said it needs replacing. I was told you will take what you're given. Now the first meeting was 5 years ago today, since I sat down with Tower and Stream and the builder and the pool builder, that they had chosen, and I protested. I had my own builders, 2 brothers, one builds pools, one builds buildings. They put a quote in and it was ignored, and they just went ahead with the 2 builders.
And you were always unhappy with the level of work?
I've got emails going right back to the very beginning where they said they'd have the pool completed in 3 weeks, and it took over 3 months to complete a pool shell, and then it was all wrong.
And so did it take some time for you to convince them that actually they needed to start again?
They took no notice until I got an IBIS builder's report in, and then they acknowledged that the whole building needed to be demolished and rebuilt. There was no engineers, no geotechs, no electricians. They collapsed the land. All the cables were underneath. That all had to be done. There was asbestos, sewage, and still they were saying we're doing fine.
And so now that they've finally agreed to actually rebuild, so they finally agreed to rebuild it, how long ago was that, and what's happened since then?
December 2014. And they've got architects that have never done a commercial pool before.
So how, and so we're getting years on, and you still haven't actually got a concrete plan for what's happening. No. What does this do to your business? How does this affect your business?
Well, I've had to halve the numbers I have through because of the safety issues with the surface on the pool, and the circulation isn't fast enough, and it's got inadequate jets and filtration. The roof is white instead of the dark green one we had. We had problems with children swimming on their backs, so I've had one staff...
So that's to do with glare?
Yes, one staff member's had a cataract extraction done, and another one has had her eyes relasered, and I really am wondering if that is to do with them working under this duress for 4 years.
And so what's it like for you? Is this a stressful experience for you?
It's a nightmare. It's destroyed my life. It's absolutely destroyed my life, my business, my health, my mental health. I'm on antidepressants and probably will be for a long time. And last week I was so desperate because they were still saying to me, you will do as you are told, that I seriously considered just abandoning and going bankrupt. And I can't see any other way out unless they start treating me with respect and acknowledge that I know about these things.
And so what would you say to Tower if they're watching? What do you want to say to them?
I would say to Tower, read the reports for yourself rather than take Stream Group's word for it, because they are telling you what they think you might know. That they need to read the Ian Coombs assessment, the Mayfair Pool's assessment, that both say the pool does not comply in any way commercially and it needs to be taken out.
So that's about listening to the customer, listening
not
to you
listening
as a client.
to me at all.
So what does Tower Insurance say in response to that conversation? Well, they're sorry to hear Chrissy is considering filing for bankruptcy. They say large-scale improvements to her pool area mean the council has requested further planning permits. It says the next step is to go to tender and engage a builder. Tower says it's been in touch with Chrissy and has arranged to talk through her concerns with her tomorrow morning. We will update you on what happens. 4.5 to 6 on Checkpoint. An eye specialist says he warned health authorities nearly 18 months ago that patients in Southland risk losing their sight over long delays for treatment. It comes as specialists demand more government funding and other changes to help reduce long waiting times nationwide. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
More than 4,000 patients in Otago and Southland heard from the Southern District Health Board this week that high demand for ophthalmology services means their eye clinic appointments will be delayed. But a locum ophthalmologist, Peter Haddad, says he worked at Invercargill Hospital's eye clinic throughout last year and was disturbed to see how long some patients were waiting then.
I saw a lot of patients that alarmed me quite a lot because they were mainly glaucoma patients, some diabetics, but mainly glaucomas, who had supposed to have been seen within 6 months of their previous visit, and it was now 12 months or even 18 months since they were last seen in the clinic.
Peter Haddad says patients in those circumstances can steadily go blind if they don't receive treatment. Patients were angry but not ready to complain, so he wrote to the DHB in June last year after raising it with the Health and Disability Commissioner.
We decided that the best thing to do was for me to write this letter to Carol Heatley and tell her what was happening and see what her response was, and that the Health and Disabilities Commission and office would contact her later to see what was going on. And they never did that. I never heard back from them.
Dr Haddad says the DHB made minor changes but did nothing to reduce waiting times. He's disappointed, including about what he says was a lack of follow-up by the health watchdog.
I was telling them that I had seen with my own eyes practice that was unacceptable. They didn't want to do anything about it. You know, you'd expect them to pick up the phone and say, hey, look, one of the doctors has told us this, this and this. If this is indeed what's going on, you guys are in big trouble.
Dr Haddad says if he was one of those patients, he'd feel let down by the whole system. The DHB's interim chief executive, Chris Fleming, says since Dr Haddad's letter, it's put more resources into eye services in Invercargill and reduced the patient backlog.
There's about 1,300 patients overdue in Invercargill presently, and that's about a 58% reduction from where it was this time last year.
Chris Fleming says Invercargill has the equivalent of 2.2 full-time ophthalmologists covering 40% of the DHB's patients, with the equivalent of 3.7 ophthalmologists in Dunedin for the other 60%. He says it's enough.
In Southland, we are keeping up with the demand now and in fact are reducing the backlog. So on the basis of the workload that's going through at the moment, yes, it appears that it is adequate to keep pace with the current demand.
Mr Fleming says the DHB also has a GP who helps specialists deliver the vital Avastin eye injections needed by many patients, and it's considering also using optometrists and nurses. Delays in treatment aren't confined just to Otago and Southland, with significant backlogs reported in other parts of the country, notably in Nelson Marlborough and Counties Manukau. Labour's health spokesperson Annette King says documents show 9 DHBs in total are not delivering enough eye appointments.
It's just disgraceful that we have got New Zealanders who are losing or have lost their sight because of a lack of treatment in a first world country like New Zealand.
The Health Quality and Safety Commission says all DHBs should look closely at their services to ensure people are being seen in a timely manner, with high-risk patients given priority. For Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
The Health and Disability Commission says it's referred its concerns about the ophthalmology service at Southern DHB to the Health Ministry in January this year, as the issues related primarily to resource constraints. It also says it's investigating a complaint relating to the DHB. It's 30 seconds before 6 o'clock. After 6 o'clock, David Parker on the long-awaited Auditor General's report into the Saudi sheep deal. No corruption, but what did it tell us about what went on? The day after Stephen Adams' big payday, and Westpac's Ramphilly branch has just closed its doors for the last time. We've covered this story a lot as they got news it was closing. Well, now it is gone. The nearest bank is in Alexandra, quite a drive away.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. The Foreign Minister accepts the Auditor General's report, which is highly critical of the government's Saudi sheep deal. More than $11 million of taxpayer money went in cash, livestock and agricultural equipment to a Saudi livestock importer the government was seeking to appease. Lynn Provost says there is no evidence of corruption, but there were significant shortcomings in a paper taken in the Cabinet supporting the deal. The Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, says he accepts the findings, but there weren't many options available to the government that wouldn't have been problematic. The Corrections Department is reviewing the case of an Auckland woman with terminal cancer whose family want her released to spend her last months at home. Vicki Leti began a 3-year sentence for fraud in March, but in September was diagnosed with terminal stomach cancer. Despite her medical team saying she can't be treated in prison, Leti was today sent back to Wiri Women's Prison from Middlemore Hospital. But Corrections has now announced it's reviewing her case. Her uncle, Ula Leti, hopes Corrections will show mercy.
Well, it's to improve her quality of life so she can live it to say goodbye to her family. That's what you would incorporate as being a quality of life. Not waiting until she's on her deathbed to be then transferred to a hospice and to die.
Ula Leti. Growth in wages has remained muted despite the economy adding an extra 35,000 jobs in the 3 months to September. Unemployment fell to 4.9% for the quarter, its lowest level in nearly 8 years. But a record level of immigration has boosted the labour supply and kept a lid on wages, which rose a modest 1.6% for the year. The Finance Minister, Bill English, says while pay rises are muted, more people are in work.
Well, you've just got this large number of people who've significant increase in the number of people who are participating in the workforce. So more of our working age population is available for work, and that's a good thing.
Bill English says with inflation near zero, workers' pay packets are paying more. But the Council of Trade Unions says weak growth reflects a shift towards low-wage jobs like hospitality, retail and accommodation. A Wairarapa dairy farmer says today's lift in global dairy prices will relieve some of the pressure farmers are feeling from banks. The key whole milk powder price jumped nearly 20% overnight and is now above the average break-even point for the first time in 2 years. Mike Moran says it's been a tough couple of years.
Well, it gives us some confidence that obviously the payout's going to be backed up this year and possibly a bit more. You know, it's 2 years of losses and you know, even if you come good this year, you've got a fair way to go to pay back the overdraft before you get back to like 3 or 4 years ago.
Wairarapa dairy farmer Mike Moran. An aviation industry group is criticising the Conservation Department's decision to stop using Robinson helicopters, saying it appears to be a knee-jerk reaction. DOC has suspended the use of all Robinson helicopters for transporting its staff after a fatal crash on Monday and the aircraft's placement on the Transport Accident Investigation Commission's watch list of serious concern. But Aviation New Zealand's Chief Executive, John Nicholson, says it's too soon to draw any links between Monday's crash and the safety of the helicopters.
It's difficult, isn't it? The take report came out last week, and then we've had the accident this week. There's a danger that companies will make knee-jerk reactions and associate one with the other, and it's far too early to be doing that.
John Nicholson says the Robinson helicopters are safe if flown within their operating limits. The latest polls show the United States presidential candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, are neck and neck, with the Republican Mr. Trump leading by just 1 point. Mr Trump is campaigning in Pennsylvania, telling voters that if he wins, he'll convene a special session of Congress to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act, known as Obamacare. The ABC's Zoe Daniel reports.
On the first day of open enrolment for Obamacare, Donald Trump railed against the flagship healthcare policy of the current president. He warned that if Hillary Clinton is elected, the policy will continue and destroy American healthcare forever.
Obamacare has to be replaced, and we will do it, and we will do it very, very quickly. It is a catastrophe.
Mr Trump delivered the speech in the suburbs of Philadelphia, which are crucial to his hopes of winning Pennsylvania, where his rival is leading. Hillary Clinton is campaigning in the battleground state of Florida today.
Zoe Daniel reporting. It's 6:05. To sport, and New Zealand's highest paid athlete, basketballer Steven Adams, says his first big purchase after signing a $140 million contract extension was a new phone. The 23-year-old centre yesterday re-signed with his NBA team, the Oklahoma City Thunder, for 4 years. However, Adams says the final days of negotiation were unnecessarily stressful, particularly for his agent.
I dropped my phone in the cold tub and it didn't work for like the past 3 days and stuff was going on. So I was like, my agent was trying to contact me and stuff and I was like, so I can't, I'm sorry. I don't have a phone. So yeah, so that was my purchase yesterday. So got a nice phone.
Steven Adams. The Olympic rowing champion Hamish Bond has moved into second overall in the cycling's Tour of Southland after finishing third in today's stage. Bond began training for the race immediately after returning from the Rio Olympics, and he's credited his teammate and overall race leader Mike Torkler for today's success.
I was sitting back biding my time in the peloton, and when we got to the bottom of the climb, my teammate Mike Torkler and myself, I sort of went off and Mike just turned the screws again and I tried to follow him but I couldn't. So really lucky that he was able to track down all of the breakaway and managed to win the stage, and I just couldn't quite catch the last of the guys and came in third.
Hamish Bond says he's still feeling fresh with 4 stages still to race. Manchester City have come from behind to beat Barcelona 3-1 as Atletico Madrid, Bayern Munich, Arsenal and Paris Saint-Germain all booked places in the knockout phase of football's Champions League. That's the news.
Reflecting on a near tragedy.
There we are, driving under lights and sirens, had been on the wrong course, and it was an endangerment to ourselves and also to other road users.
Jubilation for dairy farmers.
Very good for a change, yeah, so fantastic. It'll definitely improve farmers' morale around the country.
Just rewards for Steven Adams.
Guys look to him as a guy who's going to score, a guy who's going to be physical and who really doesn't back down from anyone.
The slam dunk. Guyan Espiner and Susie Ferguson. Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, drugs wastage, the cost to the public purse, patient safety and the environment. Why pharmacists want a nationwide disposal regime. And after 10, the 2 research fellows and PhD graduates who are the first Pacific academics at the University of Auckland's Business School. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Bay of Plenty. A few showers clearing later, fine tomorrow, apart from a few evening showers. Bay of Plenty showers, some heavy with thunderstorms in the east, clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. Waitomo to Kapiti coast, including Taupo, Taumiranui and Taihape. Cloudy periods and a few showers. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly fine, a few afternoon showers, possibly heavy tomorrow. Wellington and Wairarapa, fine spells today and a few showers, possibly heavy about Wairarapa, fine tomorrow. For Nelson and Marlborough, fine spells today and a few showers inland, some heavy, fine tomorrow, apart from showers in the west of Nelson. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine spells, a few showers developing this afternoon, possible thunderstorms and hail in Southland and Clutha tomorrow. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, a period of rain, with possible thunderstorms spreading north later today and overnight, followed by a few showers. The Chatham Islands, fine today, rain tomorrow. It's coming up to 6:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Significant shortcomings but no corruption. That was the finding of the Auditor General's report into the controversial $11.5 million Saudi sheep deal. The 15-month investigation into the deal, which saw cash, livestock and agricultural equipment given to a Saudi livestock importer, was released this afternoon. The Foreign Minister, Murray McCulley, says he's confident the agreement removed a major obstacle holding back progress on a free trade deal with the Gulf. Checkpoint invited the Minister onto the program but has yet to hear back from his office, so we probably think that that's a no. But Labour's Shadow Attorney General David Parker joins us now from our gallery office. Welcome to Checkpoint, David. Look, the Attorney General has said there was no corruption here. People started brandishing the C word, I thought, about 15 minutes ago. So if there's, 15 months ago. So if there's no corruption, what is there?
Oh, there's a terrible, shabby $4 million cash payment to a man who wasn't owed any money by government. Or anyone else in New Zealand, in order to effectively pay him off to facilitate a free trade agreement with the Gulf states. That's been our allegation all along. I think for the government to claim exoneration because Mr McCulley is not guilty of the crime of corruption, which has never been my allegation, is just wrong. Have we reached such a low bar that immorally paying $4 million to a man who wasn't owed any money, lying to the public, covering up the $4 million payment, misleading Parliament and journalists? Is that now okay in New Zealand? I don't think it is.
Can we come back to the phrase lying to the public? What was the lie? Where's the lie?
Well, initially, the only payment that was disclosed to the public was the $6 million payment for this farm in the desert. And Matthew Hooton started to say, well, this doesn't make sense. This is really about trying to facilitate a trade deal. The government denied that. They, under pressure from us in the House and also from other journalists, then disclosed a $4 million payment. They said the $4 million payment was to settle a legal claim or a legal risk that had been caused by the prior government. It was just not true.
Yes, when you and Matthew Hooton find yourself on the same side, things have gone pear-shaped, haven't they? The bigger question is then, what was the end game? What was going on here and why?
The government was trying to get across the line a free trade agreement with Saudi Arabia. And in order to do that, they were willing to pay a $4 million cash payment plus $6 million for a farm in the desert, plus $1 million on flying sheep to Saudi Arabia, all for the benefit of Mr Al-Khalaf, who was a good friend of the Minister of Agriculture in Saudi Arabia and was getting in the way of the free trade agreement. It's just unprincipled. You shouldn't do that sort of thing.
And yet there is a suggestion this afternoon, and I'm not entirely convinced that the government is explicitly going along with that version of events, but the bigger picture that we're getting out of the beehive is that the end justifies the means.
Well, why did they lie to the public and to Parliament in the meantime and try and pretend that the $4 million payment to Mr Al-Khalaf was justified because of a legal risk? They told me and others in the former Labour government that we should be ashamed of ourselves for having created this legal risk. The Auditor General records that the documents did not properly describe the proper nature of this agreement, and the pretence in the cabinet paper that there was a legal risk was not backed up by one iota of legal advice, either internally from MFAT or from external services.
Okay, so if you were misled and if you were fed insufficient, inadequate and incomplete information, it seems on the face of it the Cabinet was too. This is really confusing. If we look at this Cabinet Minister...
Well, they were. They were told
so,
that there was a legal risk that didn't exist.
Over and over and over this is referred to, the shortcomings of the Cabinet paper, the lack of transparency, the lack of clarity. Treasury recommending over and above it to the Minister of Finance that he not support the proposal. Was McCulley operating unilaterally here? Who was he working with? What was going on?
Well, he was just making poor decisions and improper decisions. You know, the fact that he can claim exoneration because he isn't guilty of the crime of corruption is no defence. You know, it's the bar so low in New Zealand that for a minister to be kicked out, he has to be in the dock for a crime. I mean, this is amoral. You know, the Auditor General makes it absolutely clear that it's not within her remit to actually determine whether this was a proper thing to do. She's just unpicked the fact that the $4 million payment was not for to pay off a legal claim because none existed, and that the documents pretended to do something that they weren't doing. i.e. all along this was to facilitate a free trade agreement, which is what we've said.
David Parker, who's Labor's Shadow Attorney General, joining us live from the gallery office. We only have Labor's point of view on this because the government simply isn't fronting. We are trying to get Murray McCully to front. We haven't even heard back from his office. It's 14 minutes past 6. Earlier tonight, Checkpoint revealed a terminally ill inmate has been taken from Middlemore Hospital back to prison, despite having just months to live. Last week, we brought you the story of Vicki Leti, who's serving a 3-year sentence for fraud. 6 months into that sentence, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Her doctors say she's too unwell to return to prison and receive the kind of treatment she needs. Applications to the parole board for an early hearing have been declined. The first one has. There is another one about to go in. Her family wants her home. Here is Vicki's mother.
We just want our daughter out so we can take care of her.
To help her, to comfort her, to make her something to eat, to help her shower, to clean up after herself.
We want her and the boys, her sons, to have time with their mother. Please. Please.
That's what we're praying for. That's what we want. You know, we want her last days or months or however long with us.
She is no threat to no one, absolutely no one.
That's Tui Latali and partner Leah Witihira, despite the expert medical opinion that Vicki is too unwell to return to prison to get the kind of treatment she needs in prison. This afternoon, corrections took Vicki from Middlemore Hospital back to prison. Vicki Leti had been in hospital since last Thursday to receive treatment for complications arising from her illness. This afternoon, we were advised the Department of Corrections Chief Executive has requested its principal health advisor review the case. Meanwhile, the parole board maintains that if at any point correction says it can no longer support the care of Vicki Leti, she will be released from prison with conditions. That decision, says the Office of the Parole Board, can happen quickly inside a day, adding the exercise is academic. Now, I spoke to Vicki Leteli's uncle, Ula Leti, and her consultant surgeon, David Moss, earlier this afternoon.
From the time that she was told that she had terminal cancer, she was told that it was less than 6 months. Well, that was in September. We're talking November now. So the clock's ticking. There's 2 or 3 months left, understanding the context of what the medical profession have told us. It's a terminal prognosis.
This is the man who did the operation to remove the tumour. So he's Mr. David Moss. He's a consultant general surgeon at Middlemore, and this is what he said about Vicki's condition.
Really, Vicki has incurable disease. We did surgery. We were able to remove most of her stomach cancer, but it had spread already, and we were not able to remove all of it. And unfortunately, stomach cancer is notoriously poorly responsive to chemotherapy. So while Vicki is having chemotherapy with the idea of prolonging things, really I don't think anyone would believe that there is other than a very small chance that this will cure her. Really it's minuscule chance that she'll be cured with chemotherapy. The idea of this chemotherapy is to prolong things for her and give her hopefully some improved quality of life for what I think is probably a matter of months she's got to live.
You've gone to the parole board with one application. They have said no to this point, but there are grounds explicitly for you to go back to the parole board, aren't there?
And they're really based on her condition and the deterioration of her condition. So really what we're saying, if you think of it in layman's terms, it's until she gets sick to the point of death, then they will not release her. Because as part of the second criteria to the opportunity to apply for early release is her demise being called imminent. Now, imminent is 3 to 5 days. Now, if you listen to what Dr. Moss was just saying in terms of chemotherapy providing a delay, or rather trying to improve her quality of life, well, it's to improve her quality of life so she can live it to say goodbye to her family. That's what you would incorporate as being a quality of life, not waiting until she's on her deathbed to be then transferred to a hospice and to die.
That's Vicki Letti's uncle, Ula Letti, speaking to us in the studio early this afternoon. It's coming up to 6:19. 3 children hid in a bush, terrified after a man tried to kidnap one of them on their walk home from school in Whangarei. The police say 2 brothers, one aged 10 and a friend, had been walking along McClintock Street in Faux Valley about 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Detective Senior Sergeant Dave Hamilton spoke to our reporter Lois Williams about what unfolded.
We have two brothers leaving a local primary school at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They were walking along McClintock Street with a friend. As they were walking past an address on McClintock Street, a 4-door old model sedan vehicle stopped on the road. A male got out, approached one of the boys, grabbing hold of him by his backpack that he was wearing, and dragged him towards the rear of the car and the boot of the car, which was open. The child was able to escape, and the 3 kids ran away. They hid in some nearby bushes for some time before returning home at about 4 o'clock, where they spoke with their mother, who rang the police. The male initial descriptions was of light skin, Caucasian ethnicity.
Pākehā.
Pākehā. Black-brown, curly shoulder length hair. This is pretty good description for young boys that are in a bit of a tiz.
They must have been absolutely terrified.
I would have thought so in those sort of situations. A further description was the male was wearing a black hoodie with rolled up sleeves, black jeans, and what was very distinctive that the children have noticed was that he had tattoos on both forearms.
Detective Senior Sergeant Dave Hamilton talking to Lois Williams. Iraqi forces have been fighting on the outskirts of Mosul, entering the city for the first time since Islamic State militants captured it more than 2 years ago. Soldiers of Iraq's elite counter-terrorism service also entered the state's television station in the city, the first capture of an important building since the start of the Iraqi offensive. The BBC's Ian Pannell is embedded with the Iraqi army as it strives to retake the jihadists' last main bastion in Iraq.
Once again, Iraqi forces left their bases before dawn. It seems they're determined to keep the momentum up against Islamic State. They've now cleared all remaining towns and villages that stands between the writ of the Iraqi government and the writ of the so-called caliphate. Once again, we're rumbling, clattering across the desert in these weirdly robotic-like Humvees with the turrets swivelling left and right, looking for possible Islamic State positions. There's been a RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, has exploded overhead, and there's been a little bit of gunfire going across. We don't know exactly what the plan is, but judging by a look at the map, it seems that we are once again trying to do a flanking manoeuvre, in other words, going round and pushing ever and ever closer towards the city of Mosul. The troops have just advanced closer to the city of Mosul. We've heard a whizzing sound overhead, which is sound of sniper fire or certainly gunfire coming in from Islamic State, and the troops have just come down. They're now trying to respond and stop the shooting coming in. The troops have now entered the outskirts of Mosul. As you can probably hear, and we're going to hear more of it and see more of it, the resistance has just grown and grown. I think it's fair to say they had much more momentum than anybody expected up until this point. But right now, they're coming under attack from a number of different directions with a number of different weapons. And just spare a thought for the 1 million or so civilians who still live in this town, and the tens of thousands who are thought to have been brought as human shields, as hostages by Islamic State when they withdrew from other cities. Many of them are now hunkered down in their homes, terrified, listening to the battle that's underway.
That report from the BBC. Signing his $140 million 4-year contract with Oklahoma City Thunder may have been life-changing for Steve Adams. What does it mean for New Zealand basketball, though, in a more parochial sense at home? The 23-year-old centre has become New Zealand's highest-paid athlete, but as Matt Chatterton reports, it will still be some time yet before we see Adams play for the Tall Blacks.
Stephen Adams has enough money to never work another day in his life, but that's not what motivates him. He wants to win NBA championships with his Oklahoma City Thunder teammates. That drive is both admired and abhorred by players and fans around the world. For New Zealand basketball, it's a combination of both. Adams has always maintained he's a proud New Zealander and would like to represent his country, even when he was living here as a teenager, but has instead chosen his NBA commitments over the black singlet. Basketball New Zealand Chief Executive Ian Potter says Adams has helped the game here by inspiring young children to follow in his footsteps, but also admits fans may not see him play for New Zealand until the 2019 World Cup at the earliest, if at all.
The very best of our players are going to play offshore, and we just have to live with that. It is frustrating as an administrator who'd just like to be able to say, right, 12 best players, these are their names, and they're all available because we chose them. That's not the way it works in basketball.
Former Tall Blacks guard Kirk Penny is hopeful that's not the case. He says there's no doubt Adams is the best thing to happen to New Zealand basketball in a long time, and he believes now that his foreseeable future is secured, it's time to pull on the black singlet.
Just watching from afar how this has played out, I would think that's what would happen, and I know he has a lot of pride in New Zealand and has said that he would like to play for the Tall Blacks at some point in time, so when's a better time?
While fans may have to wait another 3 years to see Steven Adams play for New Zealand, he'll still be representing his country on the world's biggest basketball stage. And it appears the 23-year-old is keen to keep calling Oklahoma his new home for a while.
I just like it here, man, so much, you know what I mean? I don't know, it reminds me of New Zealand, this place. A lot of good people here, obviously a really good organisation, and that's why.
And just in case you were wondering what a man who's just signed a $140 million contract spent his money on first, well, here's your answer.
I dropped my phone in the cold tub and it didn't work for like the past 3 days and stuff was going on. So I was like, my agent was trying to contact me and stuff and I was like, so I can't, I'm sorry. I don't have a phone. So yeah, so that was my purchase yesterday. So got a nice phone.
For Checkpoint, ko me Cheriton Tine.
Let's go to the town of Ramfurly, where there was a pretty sombre move as Westpac, the town's only bank, opened for its last day of business. The bank is one of 19 Westpac branches to close today, most of them in small rural areas. We've covered this extensively on Checkpoint. In Ramfurly, devastated locals dropped cards and flowers for the bank's two long-standing staffers who are now without jobs. And as Lydia Anderson reports, Ramfurly's 700 residents now face a big old trek to the nearest bank.
93-year-old Bob Patterson was today visiting his local bank for the last time. His wife Ray drives him down here every week to do his banking, and the couple have been customers for about 40 years.
We find it very difficult to understand. It's the only bank between Alexandra and Mosul. It's 90 miles to Alexandra and 150 to Mosul, plus 150 back. Here, we can walk in the door, do our business and go home.
Bob Patterson says there's no substitute for the close relationship the bank staff have with the Ranfurly community.
You know, we can walk in here, we can ring up, and they know who we are, and we know who they are. Now we're going to lose all that.
One word many locals used to describe today's closure was gutting. About half the town turned out to protest the bank's closure when it was proposed in August. The Maniatoto pharmacy owner Alan Stewart says without the bank it will be tougher for the town's businesses and sports clubs to get small change. Westpac's business customers will have the option of getting change delivered through Armaguard, but they'll have to pay a fee to do so. Mr. Stewart says there's talk of businesses pulling together and sending volunteers on a banking mission to Alexandra.
We don't go to the other towns that often during the week because we're at work, so that makes that difficult, but we'll just try and work in with everybody else, I suppose.
Westpac was today installing an ATM into the town, which has a bag drop for customers to drop off their banking. A concierge will be on site to teach elderly how to use the ATM, and a so-called digital educator will set up in the town's service centre to show residents how to use internet banking. Maniatoto Business Group chairperson Amy Pont says that should go some way to mitigating the effect of losing the bank.
Perhaps it is forcing our hand a little bit to upskill, but there will be a lot of people in the community still who cannot or will not, don't have the confidence or family members to be able to assist them. So I think a concierge and a digital educator in that sense is a good attempt to help us out with it.
Elderly resident Bob Patterson is slowly getting used to the idea of using an ATM.
Let me try it first. I'm not sticking my neck out. But however, if it's there, we'll probably learn how to use it.
But as for internet banking...
Definitely not. No, I've been on telebanking. I've found it excellent to use. I don't want to have anything to do with internet banking.
It's not clear what the future holds for the bank's 2 staff members, but locals say there'll be plenty of get-togethers in their honour. In Ranfurly for Checkpoint, Lydia Anderson.
And that ends Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate your company and your feedback. A lot of it tonight. We've been running over on everything, so a lot of the stories are continuing, so we'll just cut and paste it and bring forward samples to tomorrow night. Don't forget, late edition, repeat stuff from throughout the day on RNZ National. That starts at 10. We will be back tomorrow at 5 on behalf of our excellent team. Kelvin, let's have a shot of the team in situ. Look at that. What a team. That is the end of the show for this evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5. A very good evening to you indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Foreign Minister accepts the Auditor-General's report, which is highly critical of the government's Saudi sheep deal. But Murray McCulley also says he's confident the agreement removed a major obstacle holding back progress on a free trade deal with Gulf countries. The Corrections Department is reviewing the case of Vicki Leti, an Auckland woman with terminal cancer, whose family want her released from prison to spend her last months at home. The police say 3 terrified children hid in a bush after a man tried to kidnap one of them on their way home from school in Whangarei. The Christchurch City Council has voted for a complete ban on freedom camping. And a funeral will be held tomorrow for New Zealander Cindy Lowe, who was among 4 people killed by a malfunctioning ride at the Dreamworld theme park in Queensland. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Country Life this week's out in the paddock with novel